Hey friends, welcome to Book Talks. Since the COVID-19 quarantine has created a lot more time for us, and many of us are getting around to knocking items off of our reading lists, I thought it would be a great time to share a few brief overviews of some important books that you might enjoy and might find beneficial during this time. My first choice is a book that was published in 2015 and is titled Prophetic Lament, A Call for Justice in Troubled Times, and is written by Seung-Chan Ra, who serves as the Associate Professor of Church Growth and Evangelism at North Park Theological Seminary in Chicago. I think this book is especially relevant as our world experiences this current pandemic and wrestles with questions like, where is God in the midst of suffering? How should the church respond to suffering? And what resources and examples do our sacred scriptures offer to guide us in such a time as this? Ra invites us into this difficult challenge by describing why he discerned the need to write this book. According to Ra, the American church avoids lament. Borrowing from Old Testament scholar Walter Brueggemann, Ra goes on to explain why this is the case. Brueggemann argues that there is a divide between those with a have-not theology and those with a have theology. On one hand, the have-nots are those who are intimate with pain, suffering, and oppression, and accordingly develop a theology of survival that is characterized by lament. On the other hand are the haves, whose lives are marked by privilege, resources, and access to power, and have developed a theology of success that is characterized by celebration and praise. The problem, according to Ra, is not that many of us in prosperous North American churches have picked the wrong style of theology and worship, but rather that we have settled for only one. We have overemphasized success, celebration, and praise, and minimized, if not completely avoided, the realities of suffering and lament. In the process, we have robbed ourselves of a theological vocabulary rich and diverse enough to honestly name our human experience in light of God's promises. As an illustration of this uneven balance, Ra points us to our worship practices, and specifically the songs that we sing on a weekly basis in our churches. For instance, did you know that while laments make up nearly 40% of the Psalms, they only constitute about 13% of Baptist hymnals? In most liturgical resources, such as the Book of Common Prayer, Psalms of lament are almost entirely omitted. And a quick glance at the CCLI Top 100 Contemporary Worship Songs list reveals fewer than 10 songs that might be understood as laments. In an effort to offer a corrective to North American churches exclusively practicing a worship of praise and celebration, Ra invites readers back to the neglected Old Testament book of Lamentations. Throughout Prophetic Lament, Ra alternates between expositions of lamentations and explorations of contemporary examples of suffering in need of theological commiseration. Guided by Ra, we're invited to set Ferguson, Missouri, alongside of Jerusalem and find the consistent thread of prophetic lament that links the two. So what exactly is lament? In the words of Kathleen O'Connor, laments are the prayers of the discontented, the disturbed, and the distraught. But laments are not just expressions of disappointment and frustration. According to Ra, lament is a liturgical response to the reality of suffering that engages God in the context of pain and trouble. To put it another way, laments are not complaints, but rather protests, and theological protests, to be precise. Hear the language of the Psalms. My soul is in anguish. How long, O Lord? How long? Why, O Lord, do you stand far off? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble? How long, O Lord? Will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? My God, why have you forsaken me? And yet, how rarely have we heard such cries of anguish in our sanctuaries? How many of us have grown up thinking that such questions are inappropriate or even unfaithful? If Ra is correct, such questions are symptoms of the disease to which lament is the remedy. In a world that is filled with increasingly complex realities of pain and suffering, a church that only worships in a posture of praise and celebration has very little to offer. If we are to recover our prophetic voice, we need to restore lament to our liturgical life. In the process, elevating the voices of those who are too often marginalized and minimized in both our communities and our churches. A world in pain requires a church in lament, a church that accompanies those who have the most to lament, and those with whom God keeps the closest company. May we grow together into that kind of church. Amen.